Well, hey, folks, convicted killer Chad Daybell has released a new letter from death row, letter number 8, called The Great Eclipse. Now, in it, he turns an ordinary solar eclipse into a supernatural event, comparing himself to a cartoon character as he rewrites his own story of this misunderstood prophet rather than a three-time convicted killer. So let's look at Daybell's deliberate marketing strategy, a strategy that uses public relations tactics, psychological manipulation, and religious language to shift the world's focus away from those convictions and onto his so-called spiritual journey. Chad Daybell can't stop trying to sell a story, even from his death row jail cell in Idaho. Well, welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm coming to you from the hospital where I've unexpectedly spent the last 4.5 days after some emergency facial surgery. It's my reminder that I'm getting older, so please take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button. Now, you might notice that I'm making it a little harder to see my face. I'm kind of wrapped up like Jacob Marley in Charles Dickens' novel A Christmas Carol. And since I'm mentioning Christmas, I want to ask you to consider purchasing my books for Christmas gifts. It might be good for somebody on your Christmas list. And I promise I'm going to talk about Daybell and I'm going to say a little more about the books a little later, but you can get those things through profilingevil.com. I want to dig into this newest letter though, and it outraged me even as I sat here in the hospital and I thought, I got to kick out a video. Now, as I transitioned into this episode and letter number 8, I'm going to leverage that theme that I gave you of Jacob Marley based on how I'm looking and my current condition to tie all this together. Because in the story of Christmas Carol, Jacob Marley says, quote, I wear the chains I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard, girded by my own free will. And by my own free will, I wore it.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link. Would you know the weight and length of the coil you bear yourself?
Even Jacob Marley owned up to the mess that he made of his life, knowing that the chains he wore were forged by his own hands. Meanwhile, Chad Daybell sits on death row trying to convince us that his chain is made up of moonlights and prophecy. And I continue to find that offensive. And I'd really like your thoughts because I want to talk about letter number 8. This is going to start with an AI generated voice as I have it read Chad Daybell's letter number 8. Let's listen.
Letter number 8, The Great Eclipse. I hope my first 7 letters, along with the accompanying sections, Chad Bookshelf and Chad's musical notes, have helped you better understand my personality, interests, family dynamics, and spiritual experiences. Now with this letter, I will shift my focus to the series of chronological events that are crucial in explaining what later transpired in my life. I am discontinuing the bookshelf and musical notes sections from this point forward. Those sections serve the purpose of showing the various literary and musical influences in my life, as well as allowing me to share a few additional stories that related to each letter's main topic. I will still occasionally mention other influential books, songs, and movies that emphasize important concepts, but they will be included in the main letter. Let's begin in the summer of 2017, when my autobiography titled Living on the Edge of Heaven was published. The book's title refers to the spiritual experiences I have described in the previous letters, including my 2 near-death experiences I'd had up to that point. I had shared portions of my life story many times over the years through church talks, newspaper interviews, podcasts, and in a weekly online column I wrote. But I felt that the audience was only getting a small part of the story, so I assembled all of these anecdotes from my life into one volume. This book was well received, and I was invited to participate in several speaking events, where I would give a humorous talk with an accompanying slideshow. After my talk, I would go to a table and sell my books to interested attendees. It gave me an opportunity to meet a wide variety of people from all over the United States. One of these events was a conference held in the mountains of central Utah. It was a beautiful outdoor setting in a meadow surrounded by trees. I spoke to a couple hundred people sitting in lawn chairs and relaxing on blankets. Despite the setting sun, my slideshow is still visible, and I was pleased with the audience's response to my talk. Afterward, I spent several minutes talking to people and selling my books. As the crowd began to disperse, a bubbly, blonde woman and two of her friends approached me. The woman introduced herself as Melanie Gibb and that she was from Mesa, Arizona. I told her I had given a presentation at a writers' conference in Phoenix in 2005, but I had never been back. Melanie responded by saying she had a lot of friends in Arizona who were reading my books and who would love to hear me speak. She said she was very good at organizing events and she would be happy to arrange it. I appreciated her enthusiasm, and I thanked her for the offer to help me out. I explained I had just started working on the final volume of my latest fiction series, and once it was published in 2018, I would contact her. We exchanged phone numbers and then went our separate ways. Around this time, excitement was reaching a fever pitch in eastern Idaho for the Great Eclipse that would cross the United States in August 2017. The anticipation was magnified in the Rexburg area, which would be directly in the eclipse's path of totality, where the sun would be completely blocked by the moon. Our home was projected to be within the moon's shadow, and on the day of the big event, we had a large crowd of friends and relatives come to our property, including several people who had traveled from Utah. The eclipse would begin in the late morning, and the day was essentially considered a holiday in eastern Idaho. As the moon began to pass between the Earth and the sun, we all put on our special protective sunglasses. The actual eclipse took longer than we expected, but the sunlight slowly dimmed, and eventually only a small sliver of the sun remained visible. I glanced to the west and saw an enormous shadow approaching across the landscape, and suddenly the sun was completely blocked by the moon. We could see the amazing ring of fire that a total eclipse produces. The air temperature noticeably dropped, and people's voices even sounded distorted as we excitedly talked with each other. Everyone was marveling at how strange the world felt. Meanwhile, I had to suddenly focus on keeping my spirit in my body. It felt like my spirit was being pulled by a giant magnet toward that ring of fire in the sky. I felt dizzy and close to losing consciousness, but I just clenched my fists and gritted my teeth. This seemed to actually hold my spirit in place. After about 2 minutes of totality, a burst of sunlight emerged, and the magnetic pull I felt ebbed away. I had stayed in my body, but I felt completely exhausted. In earlier letters, I discussed my first 2-year death experiences, which happened in 1985, in 1993. It had now been 24 years since the second one, but I had always felt vulnerable to having another one, as if I could pop out of my body at any time. For that reason, I'd become much more cautious about any recreational activities involving water after my Flaming Gorge and La Jolla Cove incidents. Even jumping off the low dive at a swimming pool felt risky. I think my spirit must have been somewhat dislodged by the eclipse, despite my best efforts. I now felt disjointed with some alarming side effects. The most dangerous one was that a few times a day, everything around me seemed to stop in place. This new problem was most concerning when it would occur while I was driving. It had happened twice while I was traveling along Highway 20 between Rexburg and Idaho Falls. Each time, the world around me froze up and didn't start moving again until I was 200 yards down the road. These incidents were happening often enough that I modified my daily routine so I didn't have to leave the house unless necessary. The best description is that I was buffering, similar to when you're watching a video and it freezes for a few seconds before catching up to where it was supposed to be. I was somehow missing out on those few seconds with no knowledge of what happened during that time. About a month after the Great Eclipse, Our family was watching a DVD of the movie Wreck-It Ralph. When it came to the scene where the cute little girl Vanellope starts suffering glitches, I realized I was suffering from a similar malady. I sensed I needed a reboot, much like Vanellope in the movie. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait too long. My glitches went away after my third near-death experience, which happened in early November 2017, less than 3 months after the Great Eclipse. That incident will be the topic of my next letter.
Well, let's dig into this thing, because when Chad Daybell opens this new installment, he does what every image conscious manipulator does. He tries to clean house. He says, hey, gone are the bookshelves and the musical notes sections, those things that were filling my earlier letters with quotes, playlists, and half baked philosophies. He claims that those features have served their purpose, as though they were vehicles for self expression. But in truth, I think this is a pivot. And it's the kind of pivot a PR team would use and brand a reset. He's not discarding those sections because they've done their job. He's minimizing them because they bombed. Now you can still see a remnant or two on his updated website, so go over there and check it out. But all this is what a public relations professional would call reputation rehabilitation. When a brand suffers massive credibility loss, the first step is to refocus everybody and remove what didn't work, soften the tone, and relaunch with a new story. Well, Daybell's doing exactly that. He's treating his criminal conviction like a PR crisis instead of a moral reckoning. And he's chucking in one story after another about near death experiences. But this time, it's heaven beckoning him to come home. And spoiler alert here, he doesn't go home. Well, the setting is 2017, and it's years before the affairs or even the murders. Daybell talks about his books and how his near death experiences inspired his speaking career. He paints the image of this small town author who somehow tapped into the divine. Now, the language is friendly, it's nostalgic, it's laced with self promotion, though. He's not reminiscing, he's reestablishing the myth that he's somehow a prophet. And then, with cinematic precision, he introduces the character who would later connect him with Lori Vallow, a woman named Melanie Gibb. And he recalls the encounter like a meet cute in a romantic movie, the bubbly blonde, the mountains, the setting sun. He's mythologizing his own life, reframing the origins of a deadly conspiracy as a spiritual appointment. And this narrative laundering allows him to contaminate the truth and run it through the wash cycle of storytelling until it kind of looks clean. But then comes the heart of it all, the eclipse itself. Not to anybody else, the 2017 eclipse was an astronomical wonder, a scientific event watched by millions. But to Chad, it becomes an apocalyptic sermon. He describes the crowd wearing eclipse glasses, the dimmed lights, the drop in the temperature, and then, in what reads like a spiritual theater claim, he says that the moon crosses the sun. And get this, his soul begins to slip out of his body. He says he had to clench his fists and grit his teeth to keep his spirit from being pulled into the ring of fire. Holy cow, this isn't just wild storytelling, it's stagecraft. Or, like I like to say, maybe witchcraft. Now, he's reframing ordinary events as proof of his divine calling. And psychologically, this is a form of grandiose delusion where normal psychological sensations and maybe even emotions get interpreted as evidence of special status. It's also strategic positioning, because he's trying to remind readers and listeners that he's not just any prisoner sitting on death row. He's somebody who's had touch with heaven, and he lived to tell about it. That's the product this guy's selling, his spiritual exclusivity. And the eclipse is the centerpiece of his rebranding. It's the moment where he elevates himself above the world that's condemning him. And then he describes what happened next. He had these bizarre moments where time froze while he was driving, where the world stopped and then restarted several seconds later. He compares it to video buffering online, or to a cartoon character in a kid's movie who's incredibly unique. That's right, he thinks he's incredibly unique. And this is where the manipulation deepens. Now, before I talk about that manipulation, I want to pause for a message about my books. You know, folks, the holidays are coming fast, and I got something that I think is pretty darn special if you got true crime lovers on your Christmas list. I'm going to personally be signing books again through the end of November. That way, these things are going to arrive before the first week of Christmas, and you'll have plenty of time to get them delivered. So, you've got three choices here. First, my newest book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. It's all about understanding predatory behavior, about the victim selection process, and crime scene differences. It gives you the kind of insight that makes all of us, I think, a little bit smarter as true crime sleuths. It's a powerful tool to teach those that you love about predatory behavior, and also to help them reduce the risk of falling victim to a criminal. That's Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. Now, second, I think you'd love my book, She Knew No Fear. Now, it's the story of my great-great-grandmother's 1891 murder and how I solved that murder more than a century later. If you like stories of the immigration of people, she came from Scotland, or tackling the Wild West and unsolved mysteries, you're going to love She Knew No Fear. And finally, I want to remind you of my book, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. It's a story of survival, hope, and justice. And the cool thing is, proceeds from this book are going towards children's projects. We provide funds for the Children's Advocacy Center that just opened in May. And last month, we were thrilled to announce the creation of a brand new Criminal Justice Scholarship Endowment at Weber State University, all with funds that we received from the sales of the book Deceived. So thank you. And folks, if you live in the United States, you can get signed copies with free shipping through profilingevil.com. Now, anywhere else in the world, just go out and buy the book through Amazon or Ingram Spark. And thanks for supporting our mission here at Profiling Evil. And from all of us, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Now let's return to the Chad Daybell letter number 8. You know, by describing these episodes as cosmic side effects of the eclipse, Daybell transforms what might have been anxiety or disassociation, maybe even temporal lobe seizures, into proof that this guy's operating on another spiritual frequency. He even calls it a form of rebooting. Well, this isn't accidental language, but it's symbolic marketing. In psychology and PR professions, it's called reframing. You don't admit the glitch, you just repackage it as growth. Now, what's happening in this segment is a perfect example of what behavioral experts might call this kind of magical thinking. The belief that one's internal experiences have supernatural significance. It's also a demonstration where people use spiritual language to avoid dealing with psychological or moral accountability. So, in my opinion, it seems like every time Chad Daybell faces something uncomfortable, things like guilt, fear, loss of control, he spiritualizes it. Now, in this letter, he shouts from his pulpit, quote, "My spirit almost left my body," close quote. He said during these moments that his God was refining him, but it's all camouflage for the fact that he's a man that's convicted of multiple murders, including those of 2 children who were found buried on his property. Letter number 8 isn't random. It's part of what I call the death row Chad Daybell marketing plan. It's not an inmate's reflection on things, it's a calculated campaign that is carefully written. And he's writing it in a way that a disgraced CEO might, a memoir after a scandal, part justification, part charm, but offensively part sales pitch. And it follows the same 5-step PR formula used in crisis communication. First, you got to acknowledge, but reframe the narrative by admitting that he's getting some negative vibes, but claim from the rooftops that all of his things are misunderstood. He needs to humanize himself by telling stories of book tours and reminding us of family gatherings, all to make him look more relatable. He's doing marketing damage control, and it also teaches decision makers to shift the spotlight. And this guy is shifting it toward the cosmic or even mystical events that are happening rather than admitting the crimes of murder he's been convicted of. And he's trying to rebrand that transition of convicted murder. You know, come to know the misunderstood spiritual leader instead. And if he can successfully do that, he'll deliver the coup de grace with his call to empathy, where he adopts this tone of, I'm a humble sage who's suffered greatly. Again, all intending to keep you from remembering that he's the man whose actions have caused suffering. But what's crucial here is that none of this is about the truth. It's all about perception. He's not confessing. He's campaigning and he knows he's lost in the courtroom, but he's still fighting to win some ground in the court of public opinion. So when you read letter number 8 closely, it's clear that this guy's not appealing to a jury who convicted him, or to family members that he has victimized. He's not even appealing to the general public. He's writing for the niche audience of people who still want to believe that he is misunderstood. And by targeting this small, loyal group of believers while hoping to win a few of the majority, he's setting up a little boutique shop defense. This idea that you don't need everybody, but you need a few who will still buy what you're selling. Well, Chad, I ain't buying what you're selling because there's always an audience for a fallen prophet, a man who thinks he's been unfairly condemned by the system. And in their opinion, some people will say, this tone is perfectly calibrated for my thinking. Now, he calls them friends and seekers of the truth, and he sprinkles in humility, gratitude, and just enough mystery to keep them intrigued. It's a digital pulpit from a death row jail cell that's creating an illusion of friendship and intimacy with somebody's who most people have never met. And yet, it works frighteningly well. And from a profiling standpoint, Chad's writings expose several key psychological patterns, beginning with his narcissistic grandiosity, where everything that happens, even solar eclipses, become a reflection of his special spiritual status. Now, problems that come up aren't caused by his criminal actions, but by cosmic or spiritual forces. And any physical sensations have to be interpreted as supernatural signs. Again, Chad Daybell has made no mention of the woman that he deceived his family and the world with as he conspired to kill his wife. In fact, there's zero mention of the children that he murdered or the devastation that he's caused. But his letters do mention his spiritual prowess over and again, hoping it might neutralize his internal conflict. Now, I think in a weird sort of way that he sees himself both as a victim and a hero who's persecuted by mortals but validated by heaven. It's a self sealing system where any evidence of guilt becomes proof of persecution. Any challenge to his story becomes evidence of prophecy fulfilled. I mean, that's how dangerous belief systems remain and maintain themselves. And what fascinates me as a former investigator is how similar this letter is to, again, crisis communication in corporations. Because when a company gets caught polluting a river, for instance, it doesn't talk about the pollution. It releases a statement about their ongoing commitment to environmental stewardship. And when a bank defrauds customers, they don't talk about fraud, they talk about rebuilding trust. Well, when Chad Daybell gets convicted of murdering his wife and his secret lover's two children, apparently he doesn't talk about those murders either. Instead, he talks about spiritual glitches and near death experiences and even solar eclipses. But that's how PR works. You redirect the conversation, you change what the public thinks about, even if you can't change what they truly think deep down inside. My last video focused on the fact that Chad Daybell's letters stopped for a while before this one appeared. Now, that's not coincidence. That is strategic silence, a crisis communication tactic that's used to let outrage burn itself out before re engaging with the public. Chad Daybell waited for the media storm to calm down before he came back with this calmer tone we're reading in letter number 8. This is the new Chad, the reflective Chad. It's not humility, folks, it's strategy. By pulling back, by regrouping, by returning with more subdued letter tones, he gives us the illusion of he's making growth. But his goals haven't changed, only the messaging. And if you're wondering why does this matter? It matters because even from death row, his message might resonate with somebody. These letters are going to travel and circulate online. Heck, I'm talking about them, and others are too. They may actually shape how the next wave of followers interpret history. And don't mistake, history does show that the fallen prophet trope is incredibly powerful. Every cult movement eventually fragments into rehabilitation projects. The letters will become scripture. Followers will reinterpret his convictions as persecution. And I believe that Chad's long game is going to be that he's going to continue seeding a myth that might survive long after he's gone if we don't keep the true record in focus. So for Chad Daybell, his entire brand relies on emotional priming, his soft tone, the gentle humor, the nostalgic memories of family life. Well, folks, these are not random details. They are carefully selected to trigger the same emotional circuits that make audiences trust familiar TV pastors or self help gurus. And here's the dangerous part: even when we know somebody's guilty, our brains are wired to respond with empathy. We mistake tone for truth. That's why con men smile. That's why cult leaders whisper. That's why serial predators like Chad Daybell write letters that sound less like defense and more like devotionals. It's emotional smoke and mirrors. Because we're human, it can work. So keep the victims in the focus of this circus act, because while Chad Daybell writes about eclipses, spiritual magnets, and cartoon metaphors, the reality is that there are 3 people who are dead because of the delusions that he and Lori nurtured. Actually, there are more, 4. His wife, Tammy Daybell, murdered in her home. J.J. Vallow, just 7 years old. Tylee Ryan, 16, brutally murdered and dismembered. Charles Vallow, shot and killed. As you listen to all this drivel that he's pitching, try to remember my friend, Lieutenant Ray Hermosillo, and the other law enforcement officers who searched for and dug up those children. Tammy was murdered while it was all unfolding. Chad and Lori, though, they were cheating, planning, and gallivanting in Hawaii as they celebrated their new marriage, all while pretending to be victims of misunderstanding. That's the truth about Chad Daybell's Great Eclipse and the thing that he's trying to blot out. And if there's one thing that I'm becoming more and more sure of, that there will be a letter number 9 and beyond. And when it does, here's how to read it like a profiler. Ask about who the letter is centered on. If it's talking about him and not the victims, you're reading propaganda. So look for those cosmic metaphors, because the more celestial the imagery, the earthlier the guilt is that he's trying to hide from. And watch his tone, because humility without responsibility is still narcissistic. Track the structure, because I think it's going to continue to end with teasers for the next revelation. And if so, you'll be watching serialized manipulation. And this malarkey is a show, it's a sermon, a PR campaign that's been disguised as prophecy. So thanks for all your support of Profiling Evil. I hope you'll put your comments down below. I was really blindsided by a health scare this week that has put me in the hospital for quite some time. I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but I love reading your comments, and I hope you're going to put them down below and weigh in on this issue here. Now, I'm going to continue to recover, but my face is going to be wrapped pretty tightly. Let me just say that Jacob Marley doesn't have anything on me when it comes to bandages wrapped around the head. But more importantly, Jacob Marley's chains are probably smaller, lighter, and adorned with fewer links than this self-proclaimed prophet who claims religiosity over reality is bearing. Hey, watch for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, even on TikTok. And if you like audio podcasts, please subscribe to Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. I am so proud to announce that we've teamed up with Gamut Podcast Network for all of our audio podcasts, including our new Gardens of Evil, which is coming soon. So for those of you who are interested, I'm going to play the trailer for Gardens of Evil at the end of the closing credits. Hey, thanks for your support, folks. Never trust the predator, but never forget the victims. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.
In a quiet little neighborhood called Northwood lived a man named Arvin Shreve. Northwood was immaculate.
Such perfection that it's hard to even describe.
These homes look like they had their grass clipped with scissors.
And Arvin, a retired award-winning landscaper, was its caretaker. For many residents of Northwood, the warm and charismatic Arvin was a father figure.
I didn't have a dad, and here's this older man, and he would tell me, you can be part of our family, and we want to be part of yours.
But beneath the lush foliage and smiling faces, a great evil had taken root.
The horror that happened inside those homes with such a pretty facade, it just didn't make sense. Such ugliness covered by such beauty.
In July 1991, a young woman walked into a police station and introduced herself to Detective Mike King.
Then, very matter-of-factly, almost as if she was commenting on the weather, she said, "I've been involved with a cult that is sexually abusing children."
We're talking about multiple families and many children.
Not everything in Northwood was as it appeared.
When you hear about a cult stockpiling guns, you think about some of these places where that's turned into violence.
And the gentle, unassuming Arvin was the devil in disguise.
He's proclaiming to be a prophet.
Arvin's message was, if you do all these things for me sexually, then I have the key to get you into heaven.
And I said, we have got to get out of here.
That's easier said than done. I'm Mike King, and I led the investigation into the Zion Society cult to rescue a group of children from the clutches of this destructive sect.
My mom took me to this house. They physically restrained me, and then I never lived with her again.
We were raised that this was right. We believed this was right, didn't know that it was wrong.
On Cult Files, Gardens of Evil, you'll learn how Mike King built a criminal case against and eventually brought down the Zion Society. You'll also hear from many of the survivors of this tragedy as they tell their story in their own words.
If you gained 3 pounds, then you were damned to hell and you were going to get into heaven.
Every hour, it was our whole life. Some form of abuse, emotional, physical, or sexual. Like, I can't think of any time that was just joy.
These brave women continue to share their experiences in order to help and hopefully empower other people.
Keep moving forward. You didn't know any better.
I have to remind myself every day that I need to forgive for me, not for them, but so that I don't destroy my body in hate, I have to let go.
I've dedicated my professional life to protecting children and believe that difficult stories like this have to be told. Gardens of Evil exposes many of the methods used by predatory cult leaders, and my hope is that something like this will never happen again.
Cult Files, Gardens of Evil, a 7-episode series coming this fall, wherever you get podcasts.